Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. And we're going to go ahead and just dive right in. And as you've noticed, this session is being recorded as well. So welcome to our third and final session of our Tribal Communities Learning Series. We're so excited to have you all here. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about OHE and then hand it over to Jaylin, who is our facilitator today. So just really quickly on our Zoom tutorial for today, we do have interpretation available in Spanish. So you'll have to click on the globe-like in your screen, and then you can choose either English or Spanish. So we, again, just have Spanish interpretation. And we also have ASL interpretation as well. So if you would like Spanish interpretation, please click on that icon. You could also have the gallery view as well in here to see all the speakers and of course our ASL interpreters. And I'm just going to go ahead and get started with a land and labor acknowledgement. And this is from OHE. Every community owes its existence and strength to generations of ancestors who contributed to our hopes, dreams, and collective possibilities. Together, their history allows us to live our own legacy of hope and justice. Our collective history is that of cultural resilience, re-indigenation, adaptability, colonization, settlement, systemic violence, racism, and forced displacement. Acknowledging this truth helps build mutual respect and connection across diverse communities and lived experiences. So I know that some of you all are coming back for the third session. Some of you all might be new. So who is OHE? OHE is a people of color-led collaborative organized to center and uplift the wisdom of our communities of color through racial justice, inform health equity policies and practices as part of the movement to dismantle white supremacy and shift the imbalance of power. We envision a world where people of color are able to live fulfilling and healthy lives however they choose to. Bodies of work include advocacy convener, which is where you all are at today with this training, and our knowledge center as well. Just a couple of reminders to please use the chat function if you have any questions. Also, please use your name before we speak so we know who you are. And this session will be recorded, and as well as take care of yourself, please. And with that, we are welcoming Jaylin for our last session. Jaylin is a member of the Confederate Tribe of Warm Springs, and she's the community planner for the Health and Human Services, where she advocates and advances health equity practices and policies. And we're really thankful to have you back, Jaylin, and this is our last session. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you and stop sharing my screen. And thank you, everybody, for your patience.
All right. Thank you so much. Can I get share screen capabilities? All right. Okay. So, oh, and we're not starting at 9:04. I didn't change that. Welcome to Tribal Best Practices and Community Engagement. And I know we're a little bit behind, so we're going to go right into our check-in question. And so check-in question, so name, where you're located, and then check-in question 1 to 10, how are you doing today? One thing you are grateful for this week, and then how do you uphold and honor your traditional and or family knowledge in your work? And as usual, I will go first to model. Jaylin Seppa, I am located in Warm Springs, Oregon, and I'm like an 8.5, maybe a 9 today. I know that we're running behind schedule, but I also really appreciated the delay because it's a Monday and I had good intentions of ending a meeting that I had scheduled till 12:30, and it went over by 5 minutes, and then I had to drive here. And so I came in walking in the door with 15 minutes And I was like, I need to grab some food. I need to get my water. And so I wasn't jumping on here until probably, this is my TMI for all of y'all. And you know, we can talk about professionalism, whatever. But just that extra time to be able to eat what I had, and have that 15 minutes. And in my culture and just in my being, we we really have this like value on things roll out how they're supposed to roll out, or they go as they're supposed to go. And a lot of times that bumps up against the Western business practices of very linear and on time and all of those things. Whereas in my culture, like we even joke about it. Like I can crack a joke about us being on Indian time today, because like in our communities, we're often late, but we don't see it that way because we believe things go the way they're supposed to go. And so maybe that meant other folks had a little bit extra time to eat their food or get to their desks or whatever. And so I appreciated that extra 15 minutes, even though it's a delay, and I don't see it that way. So gratitude for the extra minutes. One thing I'm grateful for this week, well, it's Monday, and it's definitely a Monday. I am grateful for I'm grateful for my children this week. I mean, I'm grateful every day for this, but my daughter has 3 volleyball games this week. And so I have a hard stop all week at 3 o'clock, which isn't normal for me. But because she has 3 games, I was on travel last week and missed her 2 first volleyball games of the season and was really disappointed. And so I'm making it a point to not miss a game, not be late, be there ready. And so I'm working till 3. And so I really appreciate when they are holding me accountable, even though they don't know they are. They're holding me accountable, and I get to draw that hard line. How do I uphold and honor my traditional and family knowledge in my work? I think this training is one way that I do it. I get to really teach people what it's like to work with tribal communities and tribal nations so that we can hopefully decrease the harm that has happened. But I also run an organization called Papalaxamisha, where our work, we are really doing heart work, and it's really about healing and centering healing in the ways that we show up in community and in our programs. And so when we first started it and we start talking about healing, a lot of people are like, what? Like, how do you heal people? And we don't ever claim to heal people, but what we do center is healing, which we believe is through our traditional teachings and practices. And so we weave in our cultural teachings and practices into our programming on an everyday basis. And that is what we try to center the most, because we believe that if we're speaking our language, if we're learning learning how to weave, or gathering our foods, or eating our foods, or talking about stories and sharing family stories, that we're healing parts of ourselves. And so I get to do that on a daily basis within that job, which is my primary job that I get to do. And so that's the way that I honor and uphold my traditional family knowledge, is being able to weave it into our work and really center it and use it within our programs and the way that we show up and be in community. So we'll do the raise hand. So if you could go to your, where is it at here? Reactions, and raise your hand. And then we'll just do the same thing where we pick the person that's below us from raising hands. And then again, and if you don't feel like coming on screen, or you just want to verbalize it without coming on screen, or if you want to drop it in the chat, please do. Again, I want you to show up how you are comfortable showing up. And if you drop it in the chat, I will read it at the end. And then if you aren't comfortable coming on screen, but you want to talk, that's fine too. I want to meet everybody where they're at and where they're comfortable with sharing. And so I'm going to go to the first person that I see on the list, and it's Sumiko. Oh, you got a fly running around here.
Thank you, Jalen. Hello, everyone. I'm coming in today at a 6. And one thing I'm grateful for this week is, honestly, I'm just grateful for being here today. And how I uphold and honor my traditional family knowledge in my work. I do my best to do that by just showing up as authentic as possible. I identify I'm a Black woman, and I have been conditioned all my life to not show up as my authentic self. So I'm grateful to work for an organization like OHEI, where that's actually celebrated and encouraged. And so anytime I'm in a space where I am meeting with like community partners or community members, especially when there's predominantly white spaces, I do my best to still show up as my true self, because I can hear my mom and my other ancestors saying, it's okay, relax, just be yourself. So great check-in question. Thank you. I think the person underneath me is Benish, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name.
No worries. Yeah, it's Beanish Kamran. She, her pronouns. Yeah, thanks so much for this debrief and question. I feel like I'm at a 7 today, and that's actually higher than I feel like I have been a few days before. Just because I've been experiencing, some unusually persistent lower back pain, which when something different happens with your body, it's a little unsettling. But I also am extremely grateful for our bodies and my body's like ability just to heal, and seeing how it has been over the last few days, and with this, support and guidance of coworkers and just the expertise of folks around me. Yeah, I'm feeling more healed than I thought I would be at this point. And so feeling grateful for that. And I think that's also connected to one tradition in my family and in my community is gratitude, and and that's something that's really, it comes in different forms. But in the workplace, one thing I've noticed, and I even experienced it today on a call, is just having appreciation and celebration in the workplace is very just not normal and not common, and being able to recognize that and prioritize it when others aren't, or when others are kind of just trying to get through an update meeting. So I kind of caught myself in forgetting to do a celebration in one of our meetings today, and made sure to pop back in to do that as well, and just have gratitude for my coworkers, and yeah, just celebrating wins and making sure I'm embedding that in the conversations I have with colleagues. And I think next is Daisy.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Again, Daisy Olaya Sotelo, Pranchi Ella. I think I'm coming in at a 7.5. It is Monday, so I feel like Mondays are always a little bit hard, but I'm grateful for you all to being here with us today. And I think, how do I uphold and honor traditional and family knowledge? I think I grew up in Mexico and half of my life now here, but I think just remembering what our elders did. So I love holiday season, just because it reminds me of family unity. And I think that that's something that I've been trying to also kind of pass on to my younger siblings, and remind them, what the holiday season really is about. And so I think just sharing it, with other people, but also making sure that our younger generations are aware why those holidays are important to us, and what, beauty they bring to us as well. And I'll hand it back to you, Jalen. I know there's some other intros in the chat.
Yes, thank you. And I will read the 2 intros in the chat. Jennifer Webster, she, her, Lane County Public Health, coming in at a 6 today, weirdly hurt my back this morning. I am grateful for the team I work with this week as we're hosting a major event tomorrow that has been almost a year in the making, and it's going to be awesome. Love the enthusiasm and the positive perspective beforehand. Hello, Carmen, she, her, Apano. I'm at a 6.5 today and grateful for the fresh tomatoes I had for part of my lunch today. I have to step away at 1:30 for a short meeting, but will return at 2. All right, thank you. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I am, so I'm not calling out. I'm just recognizing something. So when I asked people to do their name, where they're coming from, it's interesting. I asked for location. It's interesting because we had people that went straight to their jobs. And so I just want people to think about that for a moment. I just came back from travel, like I said, last week, and I was gone all week. And my sister who traveled with me, she ran an Indigenous affinity space. And in her activity, what she did was we had to partner up, and each partner had to talk for 2 minutes about themselves. What they couldn't do was talk about work. And I am somebody that talks about work all day long, everywhere, all the time. I get stopped everywhere I go in my community and get talked about, like, what are you guys doing now? Or I have this idea. And so work is like a normal part of my life. And we were discussing before she did, so I helped her kind of formulate her agenda for her space. And we were talking about that because I struggle with that. And I struggle with connecting my career with my identity. And oftentimes that's what we're asked, usually when you do introductions, right? Your name, your organization, your title, and pronouns now, so, but I didn't ask for that in this space. And so I just wanted to note that and allow people to process that because I know you are here for work, right? But there was a purpose of why I don't ask. And you might have noticed through all 3 of these sessions that I haven't asked for anybody's title. And that's intentional. I intentionally do that because I also, a part of this work, although we're showing up for work, is also not a part of our work, right? It's the way that we show up in community, the way we are in community as ourselves. And so I just want to note that. And also just know I've been doing that since the very first session I don't usually ask for, when I have regional ones, I ask for organization, but most of the time I ask for location, and it's very intentional because a lot of the times when we're doing this, I also want people to really think about how they are working with and for tribal communities, because oftentimes we have networks within tribal communities where you kind of have to be vouchered in. And what I mean by that is, like, someone has to vouch for you in order for you to. And so, like, if you have a friend or, like, it's like any other group, you kind of have to, people have to fill you out to see if they want you to come in. And so just wanted to note that for people to think about that, of like, how do we show up in our spaces and what's being asked of us? And oftentimes we do attach ourselves to our careers, and that's hard to get out of when we're working probably more than our normal hours, that, a regular job a lot of the time, especially when you're in like social work and this work. And so just noting that. All right, so we will go on to so I'm just going to list, and I know we're short on time and we have a video that's about 18 minutes long, so I'm going to just briefly go through these. They're just, these aren't all of them. These are just what I would suggest. These are thoughts that I've had of the way that as an individual outside of your organization, best practices. And so, as always, do your research. There's a lot of resources out there to utilize, to learn more. This one, which I think we might have shared in the last one, but tells you whose land you're on. And it's not 100% effective, but they do a really good job for the most part. Ask yourselves, am I helping or am I hurting? Are you tokenizing or are you educating? And how does this impact tribes? So always just being curious and asking questions for yourself. The tokenizing or educating, that is a tricky one, because sometimes, let's say you do have one person in your organization that is from a tribal community. And so anytime you're working with the tribes, you go to that person and you ask, like, how should I do this? Or tell me more about the history. You have to ask yourselves, what realm is that? I guess, at what perspective are you coming in as? Because if there are things that you can do on your own to learn, like if you want to learn the history, there's a lot of resources to be able to do that. And so to ask an Indigenous person to do that can also feel very tokenizing, when you can take the time to learn those about that tribe or about that community, because there's resources around it. Now, there's not always resources around it, so this isn't every instant, but that's an example of that. Your board, for example, maybe you bring on a tribal person and there's only one. Asking yourself, are we bringing this person on because we really want their perspective and we really want them to maybe disrupt what we know? Or are we bringing them on because we need to be able to check the box to say that we have an Indigenous person? Include an action. I've seen people's emails, so these two go together. So the third and fourth one, include an action. So in anything that you're doing. So I would say, in my territorial acknowledgements that I do, which is just, it's like a land acknowledgement, I always include an action, and depends on where I'm at. So like if I'll direct people to the Choosh Fund, which is a donation link for funds to support the water issues that my tribe is specifically having. But if I'm like in the Bend area, I'll link both. I'll link the Choosh Fund, but I'll also link the Ambio Fund, which is for the Klamath tribe as well. Resources, sharing resources, those types of things, you can always do that. And I always ask for an action if I do a territorial acknowledgement, I ask for action, because it's one thing for me to say something, it's another to then do something about it. And so I always ask people, when you walk away from here, please, I guess that's my ask. My ask is, I ask everybody to do an action that they're comfortable with doing, that they can do in their lives, in order to go beyond me doing that territorial acknowledgement and that organization or that event doing that territorial acknowledgement. You can do these things in your email signature. I've seen people with really lengthy email signatures, but it still provides resources and information. Will all people read that? Probably not. Will there be some? Yes. Learn about Senate Bill 13 and share your knowledge. Share that this is actually a law and that school districts should be incorporating tribal history into their curriculum within the school district, because it's law. Ask those questions. Ask the teachers, ask the superintendents, ask the school board members, do they know about it? Because I can guarantee you tribes are out there trying to advocate and push it, but not all school districts even know that this is a law in Oregon. And if you're in a different state, find out if they have it in your state. Montana has it. Minnesota, I believe, just passed theirs. Washington has it. I think California's doing some work around it. Alaska. So there are many states that are starting to push legislative bills to turn into law to teach tribal history. So ask those questions. Build relationships. That's always, that's been the theme across this series is relationship building. Volunteer and be an ally. There's a lot of volunteer opportunities. There's a lot of ways to show up as an ally. Ask questions and be willing to be uncomfortable. That is where the growth occurs, is when you're uncomfortable. And if you are uncomfortable, check in with yourself and ask yourself, why is this making me uncomfortable? Where is that coming from? All right, so I have the video queued up already. So let me figure out how to get there. And then I also have to, let me stop sharing really quick. While I am doing that, I'm going to, let's see, hold on, sorry. I have the video up here. So to make sure I share the sound, because I got it wrong one time. I tried to share and I muted myself because I was like, I don't need to be on there. The video is playing. I muted the entire system and nobody could hear anything. And it took them 2 minutes. And then they were like, we can't hear. And I'm like, oh, so now I was double make sure that I have shared sound on there, because then I can mute myself, but also share my sound. All right. So if somebody could just give me a thumbs up once it starts playing and you can hear it. I just want to make sure that you can hear once I start the video.
Hamatakiape, Pate Dutuan Omakiaye, Chante Washde Nape Cheyuzapaye. We are here today on Treaty 1 territory, which is the territory of my ancestors and of my descendants. My great-great-great-grandpa was 41 in 1871 when Treaty 1 was signed. He lived on the St. Peter's Reserve and was represented at the treaty negotiations by Chief Henry Prince. I believe from our teachings that when Chief Prince was deliberating on the treaty, that he was thinking 7 generations down the line. In my family, the 7th generation from the signing of Treaty 1 is the generation of my children. It's also the generation of children like Tina Fontaine and Jordan Anderson, both of whom experienced the tragic reality of the gaps in Indigenous health. Tina Fontaine was a youth in CFS care when she was murdered, put in a garbage bag and dumped in the Red River. Jordan Anderson was a child from Norway House with complex medical needs who died in the hospital having never been to his home community, while the federal and provincial government fought over who would pay for his healthcare expenses if he left the hospital. These gaps are not the fulfilled hope of our ancestors, and we will not allow it to be another 7 generations before we are as healthy as the people we've agreed to share this land with. Let me share just 2 statistics with you to highlight the general pattern of Indigenous health and healthcare gaps in Canada. Among First Nations people in Manitoba, the rate of diabetes is 203 per 1,000. This is over 4 times greater than the rate of diabetes in the non-First Nations population. The rate of amputation due to diabetes, an outcome largely preventable through proper medical care, is even greater. The rate amongst First Nations people is 3.39 per 1,000 and 0.19 per 1,000 for the non-First Nations population. This means that a First Nations person living with diabetes is 18 times more likely than a non-First Nations person to have part of their leg cut off. How do we make sense of this? The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada calls on us to understand the gaps in Indigenous health as a result of previous government policies. From a population health perspective, the mechanisms by which these gaps are created are largely through the entrenchment of poverty, the chronic underfunding of education and child welfare, inadequate overcrowded housing, and other such social and economic policy choices. It would be fair to say, however, that the healthcare system has to a large extent been complicit in the maintenance of these gaps, and at times an active contributor through multi-level racism. Now, for most people, when we think of racism, our immediate understanding is of personally mediated racism, we can easily see interpersonal racism in the words and actions of people who have come to believe that a certain group of people is inferior to another group of people. This bias can be conscious or unconscious, and even if unconscious, can influence behavior and clinical decision-making, as done in research largely documented in the US. Recently, the College of Family Physicians of Canada released a report on the health and healthcare impacts of systemic racism on Indigenous peoples in Canada. They refer specifically to the case of Brian Sinclair, an Indigenous man who was referred to the emergency room by a community physician. He waited 34 hours to receive care, vomiting on himself, and with other ER visitors asking nurses and security guards to help him. When they finally checked on him, they found that he had been dead for several hours of an untreated but completely treatable bladder infection. The next level of racism I want to discuss is institutional racism. Institutional racism is differential access to the goods, services, and opportunities of society by race. There need not be an identifiable perpetrator, and it has generally evolved over time through historic actions like the implementation of colonial policies. Examples of institutional racism in healthcare can be found in the spring 2015 Auditor General's report on healthcare access in remote First Nations. There are many serious issues identified in the report. I'm only going to highlight one today. Of the 45 nurses that they examined, only one had completed the 5 quote-unquote mandatory training courses for nurses to practice in nursing stations. One of those courses is Certification in Advanced Cardiac Life Support, ACLS, essentially keeping you alive or resuscitating you if you are critically ill or injured. Only 33% of those nurses, the only healthcare professionals in the only healthcare facility in these remote, mostly fly-in communities, 33% had their ACLS training. Comparatively, 79% had completed the training on controlled substances or narcotics. Priorities, right? Let me ask you this. Where else in Canada would we tolerate an inadequately prepared healthcare workforce at a time when we need it most? As we continue to look at healthcare through this lens of multi-level racism, I next want to discuss epistemic racism. All of racism centers around the idea of one group of people being inherently superior to another group of people, and then using its power to maintain its societal position of advantaged access and control of power, money, and resources. Epistemic racism focuses on the belief that the knowledge and ways of knowing of one people are superior to another. Now, our healthcare system is based within a Western, Eurocentric, Western and value framework with specific rankings of knowledge according to what type of Western scientific inquiry produced the knowledge. An easy way to look at this is to look at clinical practice guidelines, most of which describe the strength of the recommendation according to the type of evidence that produced it. So Class 1 recommendations are the result of multiple large randomized controlled trials. These are the gold standard of evidence. Class 2 recommendations are the result of a single randomized controlled trial or non-randomized clinical trials. Class 3 recommendations are based on the consensus of experts, case studies or case reports, or if it's the current standard of care without any evidence. There is no place or grade for Indigenous knowledge. Now, I'm a general internist and I do mainly cardiology in my clinical practice, and I rely on these forms of evidence and these guidelines to guide my treatment of ischemic heart disease. But they didn't help me when the First Nations woman was having difficulty reconciling the medical treatment of her heart disease with her residential school experiences. They didn't help me when the First Nations man disclosed that the chest pain he had was linked with the panic attacks he's had since his sexual abuse as a child. They don't help Indigenous peoples when the healthcare system doesn't meet their needs, either because they can't get into the system, or when they do, they are treated as less than fully human by a system built on a concept of health and healing that was privileged over their own. I read a quote the other day by Marie Baptiste, and what it said was this: education can either maintain domination or it can liberate. It can sustain colonization in neo-colonial ways, or it can decolonize. Every school is either a site of reproduction or a site of change. And I want to share a story today of how healthcare can be different and can be a site of change, of liberation and of decolonization, because I believe that quote is just as true of healthcare as it is of education. So Manitou Ikwe Kagikwe started as the Mothering Project and is a program that operates out of Mount Carmel Clinic to support women who use substances and are pregnant or early parenting. My role with the program is to lead the evaluation team, and briefly, here's how I got involved. I was presenting at a conference a couple years ago in Winnipeg on maternal child health. The nurse lead for the program, Margaret Bryans, was also presenting. This was early in program development, and she discussed the intention for the program to be culture-based. A leading American maternal child health specialist stood up and praised this approach, particularly because it would include an evaluation component, and thus would evaluate this Indigenous knowledge to see if it was in fact valuable and valid to the health of Indigenous women, children, and families. I took my turn at the microphone to respectfully challenge his comment. It was respectful. What I said was that requiring one set of knowledge to be validated by another knowledge system presumes that second knowledge system to be superior and to have the power to proclaim it valid or not. This is what some have referred to as cognitive imperialism, and what I have referred to today as epistemic racism. So, according to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it is Indigenous communities, families, and individuals who have the right to define what knowledge, Western or traditional or both, is relevant to their health and healing. So I got asked to do the evaluation. The Anishinaabe name of the program, which was received through ceremony, is Manitou Ikwe Kagikwe, Spirit Woman Teachings. This was taught to us as meaning that women carry all of the teachings within them that they need, and the role of the program is to walk with them gently and remind them that they know. Women have traditional roles as caregivers and knowledge keepers, and it is of critical importance to reclaim those roles. Our evaluation at this phase was mainly qualitative and focused on the stories that women told us about the program. We looked for ways that the meaning of the name and the 7 sacred teachings were present. Listen to these words, which capture the essence of the name. When you have a space and a place and a time, and none of those issues that people label you with, where you get to go, and none of those things are what confine you or limit your ability or your heart or your spirit, then you have a real chance to grow into, to come into growing who you are and who you want to become. The first teaching is wisdom, Nabwakawin. To these women, wisdom means knowledge that is based on lived experience by people who are willing to learn from the choices that they have made. It is knowledge that is shared in a way that treats everyone as equals and that helps people to uncover their own knowledge. And the women told us about how they support one another through crises, they offer advice, and they make decisions for the program, all based on the experiences that they've had. The second teaching is humility, Dabadandizuwin. Humility is being yourself without thinking you are better or worse than anyone else. It is being able to make mistakes and be accountable to them. It is sharing what you have without needing credit or recognition when someone else succeeds. Humility is a critical aspect of what makes this program a safe space for these women who are often highly stigmatized in healthcare and society in general and are often labeled as hard to reach. One woman said, "I see a lot of the struggles. Like all of these women, they have their own stories, but I see a little bit of myself in them, and that's what keeps me going. We all have our stories, we all struggle, but we're all similar in little ways." The third teaching is respect, Minadendamoen. Respect means that everyone's knowledge and value is recognized and treated as equal. It is treating others how you want to be treated, and really importantly, it's that no one is treated with discrimination or with judgment. One woman made me think about how rare it was for her to be treated with respect when she said this. I guess it just kind of makes it more like on an even basis. They're not looking down on everyone. The fourth teaching is love, Zagaiduin. To these women, love is an unbreakable connection, undivided attention, leading first and foremost with kindness. It is sharing what you have, and it is showing appreciation and caring. When you share what you have, you don't expect anything back. I'm going to share 2 quotes from the evaluation, one from a staff member and one from a client, and I want you to make the link between how we hire people and what people experience. So the staff person said this: we hired for kindness, and we hired for kindness. We don't do kindness well in healthcare or social services, and so we worked really hard to find people who would just shower people with love. I want you to take a moment and just think about your own healthcare experiences, and think about if you have ever felt showered with love. Now, I want you to keep that reflection, but I want you to also imagine that you are a racialized Indigenous woman in Winnipeg. You have kids in care, and you need health care for your pregnancy while you're still using substances. Now, the healthcare experience you might have in this program is this: we're like a little family. I love all of these staff workers. I love these girls, the clients. We're like a little family, and I love it. We're all related in some way, just even through the streets, whatever. We're all related in some way, and we all relate to the same things. The 5th teaching is bravery. Akudewin. Bravery is revealing yourself without knowing what the outcome will be. It's setting goals and following through. It's being willing to try out new solutions. And in this context, it's getting your kids back in parenting. This is bravery. I guess the other thing that was hard or that was difficult for me in the beginning that I just recently learned to deal with was this is my old stomping grounds. This is my old using area. So even when I was coming down here, even from downtown, I used to get really bad anxiety. I knew where I was going. I knew there was a safe place. I knew there was women I trusted. But bringing myself into the area, that was really difficult for me to do in the beginning. The last 2 teachings are truth, Debwewen, and honesty, Guayakwadizawin. The quotes I share already highlight concepts of both, including staying true to your principles, doing what you say you're going to do, sharing the hard truths, not with sugarcoating, but with kindness. I think the quotes have also already begin giving you a picture of how this healthcare experience is different from the usual healthcare experience. But I will share a few more to highlight some of the outcomes that women are experiencing. One woman said, we have our own space, we have our own time, we're finding our own voices, and in that we're gathering strength. That is an incredibly valuable health outcome. Another woman said, I used to hate myself. I used to hate everyone around me. I used to hate my life. I don't feel like that anymore. I love the people around me now. I love myself. I'm proud of who I am. I'm not ashamed of myself anymore. I'm proud of who I am. And I wouldn't have got this far without these women. You have likely heard in the media that 1 baby a day is apprehended from the hospitals in Winnipeg. All of the women who have kids in the program either have or have had kids in care. At least some of them now are getting their kids back or going home from the hospital with their babies. One woman shared this: I was ready to let him go. I was ready to let him go, but the women helped me with the social workers. They helped guide me into bringing my son home and stuff. I'm so thankful I stayed in the program. I can't imagine my life without my son. Another woman shared, I never thought it would be this big. I mean, it's unreal. It's amazing. It's amazing, and it's right in front of my face every day because my daughter is right in front of my face every day. I don't want to say that I feel like I owe them everything, but they've given me everything I have. This program respected Indigenous self-determination in a local context by giving decision-making power and leadership to the Indigenous women who would be accessing the program. These Indigenous women said that Indigenous knowledge of health and healing was essential to them, so the program based its operations in Indigenous cultures and teachings, with the grounding in the 7 sacred teachings as one example. This intersection, coexistence of Western healthcare with Indigenous knowledge has created outcomes that the women themselves judge as valuable. Strength, pride, voice, being clean or reducing the harms of substance use, family, friends, and parenting relationships with their children for some. If we want to close Indigenous health gaps, part of the answer is re-examining the assumptions of Western healthcare, evidence-based medicine, and the definition of essential services, and ensuring that all Indigenous people are able to access Western and traditional knowledges of health and healing as they define essential to them. Padamya and Takuyasan.
Fred Meyer.
Sorry, I had to exit out because it goes right to the next YouTube video. So I know that we have a break scheduled for 2 o'clock. So I just wanted to take a few minutes to debrief and then we'll take that break. Since we do have a couple of minutes here before 2 o'clock. So if anybody wants to come off mute and reflect on that video. For me, the reason I show it, even though it's talking about health, but I feel like it can translate into kind of any systems that you're working within, is when we're talking about community engagement and working with tribal communities. For me, what I heard from that video was the centering of the culture, the values, the language, and the belief systems of that First Nations, because that wasn't, she's from Canada. Okay, perfect. And that for me is important. And also, you know, she is coming from a research background. And I think that is also a part of it is, and she talks about, you know, reevaluating the evidence base, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But and then just also when we're thinking about the way that we engage with community, one of the first things she talked about was the validation of knowledge. And when we are going into community and saying, here's what we think you need to do, or here's this curriculum, or this is the way that we do our programs, what we're doing without saying it is we're prioritizing and we're also lifting up whoever's knowledge base that's coming from. And so that creates that I think she said cognitive superiority. I think that's the word she used, but it lifts up a knowledge base above that tribal knowledge, those tribal teachings, all of those things. And so it's saying that this is the correct way to do things and your way isn't. And whether you're saying that or not, that's what's happening. And so I'm going to just leave the floor open for 2 minutes. And then, not that I'm going to crack the whip if we're over 2 minutes, but I'll just say 2 minutes. If anybody wants to come off mute or put thoughts in the chat, I'll just leave room to discuss this video. Thank you, Jan. Yes, Jan.
One thing that struck me in this video was that, well, first of all, the unusual and valuable method of reaching out for the client, I'll call them clients, for the Indigenous people's perspective on health and seeking that out first. Okay, the value of that is so clear in this video. But the other thing, it's not just valuable to take that into account for care and work with Indigenous communities, but actually that could be a whole new paradigm for healthcare in general, taking the wisdom of Indigenous knowledge into the Western paradigm. And I've been advocating that locally as a way to bring up the performance in school for Indigenous kids, because not only do they not see their knowledge, their historical, culture, and I mean, I don't mean just like cultural practices of the day. I mean, all that wisdom that comes from Indigenous systems of knowledge. They don't see that in their being valued in their system of education. Neither do the white kids they go to school with. And that's a major problem, because that enables that dissonance and that racism to continue on. So if we don't bring that in there as an equal standing, we have no chance of, first of all, we have no chance of improving our processes, right, for humans. So I'm really grateful for that video. It was amazing. And I'm going to use it in my community to enrich our conversations around this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And that's because, and it can be, I mean, they're talking about health, but it can intersect with everything, and you can just change the language a little bit. I do a lot of work in education, and that's, what I've been advocating as well, is if we don't use, if we can't bring in our knowledge, our values, and the way that we learn, and we're still made to have to learn this way, we're never going to be successful, because it's still a system that we didn't create, nor that we can survive in, and less we can't even thrive in, because if we're surviving, we're not thriving, and that's not good for us. So, and then, health, it can go into so many other, I just did some work with a watershed. And so I don't ever change this video, because it can just, you just change the language a little bit, but it's really just talking about systems. And I see that Love came off of she turned her camera on. So I'm assuming she wants to jump in here.
Thank you, Jalen. Mine is just very easy. This morning at work doing our team huddle, when I jumped on, and this talk just made me kind of think about when I jumped on. I had just got back from the Yakima Reservation this morning, and everyone was saying hello. And so for me, I said hello. I said Wikwasan, which means good morning. And then hello. But why am I doing that? Because that's the traditional way that I would say hello. And so to me, one of the many, many things that I got from this video was being able to be brave and speak to your truth and who you are, because that's how in my household that we greet each other. So it's the bravery of being able to be who you are in the workplace, because it's only a portion of who you are. So there's so much in that video, but I just wanted to share how the takeaway of what it made me think about when I started my day today. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I remember when I first watched that video, I was in it was like a traditional health worker training, and that's where I came across the video, and I was like, boom. And then also it just came up against one of my mentors, who was my supervisor for the longest time, worked really hard to get tribal-based practices through legislation here in the state of Oregon, which we're going to get to, and I'm going to talk more about it. And I try to share it with everybody, because it is really about centering our teachings, our values, our culture, and being able to really build up a foundation and a system that works better for us than us trying to fit a system that doesn't work for us. But I don't know if anybody has anything else to share. If not, we will take a 5-minute break, just so we're not, because we only have a short amount of time, which I always think this one's gonna be short, but it's actually one of the longer ones. So let's do 5 minutes. So we'll come back at, see, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We'll come back at 2:13. All right, thank you, everybody. Let me get the slideshow going here. So like I said, tribal best practices is is law for Oregon. And a lot of people actually don't know sorry, I'm reading there's a question in the chat. Thank you, Liz, for your comment. And I fully agree. And that is my position as well. Not to get off topic, but to your point, I ran for school board, lost by 55 points. And then someone exited a seat and I just put in an application, had to go through an interview process. And that was one of my foundational points, was what's best for our Native students actually supports and is best for all students. So yes, fully agree. Thank you for your comment. So tribal-based practices, and I put best in there because when they first started doing this work back in 2003, it was called tribal best practices. And I got to mentor under Caroline Cruz. I got to mentor under Caroline Cruz, who works here in Oregon. She is currently the health the general manager for health and human services for my tribe. Her, alongside John Spence and the 9 tribes and leaders throughout Oregon, worked on the tribal-based practices. And essentially what it was is practices, it was equal to the, hold on, slow down, I'm getting excited here. So what they wanted to do was build, basically the intent is to be proactive yet culturally sensitive when describing tribal specific approaches to service delivery. And there was a couple of goals that they were trying to accomplish. One, funding, because funding kept saying it needs to be evidence-based, it needs to be evidence-based. And they were advocating to be able to use tribal practices as a way to do programming, and could not convince, the powers that be. And so what they decided to do was work on legislation to ultimately turn it into a law, which they did. And in 2003, they started doing this work, and it became, I think it was Senate Bill 770 is what it was. And I can drop this in the chat for you all to see. It's the tribal-based practices. It's kind of like it'll spell it out for you more. It'll give you way more history than I can give you. It'll tell you which practices are in that are considered tribal-based practices. Really, the only thing when they put up the bill, the state asked for, the one change that they really asked for was to change it from tribal best practices to tribal based practices, so that it would match up and align with evidence-based practices. And so, and I worked through the lens of best practices. So when that happened, and I had to, so sometimes my brain doesn't switch over, and you'll still hear me say tribal best practices. But I'll drop that in the chat. And one of the things that here in Warm Springs, the slogan, it's a slogan, but really for us, it's about being able to integrate our cultural teachings and practices and traditional knowledge into programming. But so a lot of times we say culture is prevention. which, I believe very strongly it is a protective factor. And so, for those of you that are in like the prevention, mental health, SAMHSA world, it is culture is a protective factor. And I strongly believe that. And so the slogan that we use is culture is prevention. And so this is in Oregon. I have not heard if it's in any other state, because I've only done this work in Oregon. I'm sure John is trying to push it in Montana because that's where he's from. But I'd just like to share this. What I do ask when I share the link in the chat, when you do use it, please just use it for informational purposes only. I would ask that, for one, obviously the practices that are listed, you can't do them if you're not from that tribe or from that group of people. And so don't ever lead them. But it just gives you an idea of what this can look like within your organizations or how to support tribes. And it gives you that base. And then if you need to use it, like there's a lot of times where if an organization says, we can't do that, and I'll say, well, yeah, you can. Look, here's an example. And so I use it in that way as well. But I just ask that you use it for your information only and as a guide. Please don't do the practices in there. If you have people that do lead them, I would say bring them in, because they would never probably call themselves the experts, because we don't really necessarily use that term, but they are, they're the keepers. And I always stress that of don't ever lead anything that from a community or tribe that you aren't from. There are people that do that. And some of them aren't to use, like, there's certain things that we will never use within our programming because it's ceremony, and it's not about the work. It's about, whatever's happening in our community or that ceremony. And so there's certain things that just aren't used in that way. So utilizing tribal, I kind of went over this a little bit just now, but utilizing tribal-based practices, you can use it through tribal consultation. So relationship building, having someone come in. I'm currently doing that for a watershed organization right now, of how they can better support my tribal nation. Allowing the community or the tribe to lead it. I just said that. Building and maintaining trust. Acknowledging and utilizing tribal-based practices. That's an important one. And we just kind of talked about that. We saw that in the video as well, is I don't want to say allowing, because that's not what it should be, but acknowledging and utilizing, and just really centering not just tribal-based practices, but really what it comes down to is the knowledge and the teachings and the practices of the people you're serving. Not everyone is linear. Circular is our way, and so it might look different. Acknowledging the practices and values and beliefs of communities and tribal nations. Traditional knowledge is important and should be validated. We know our communities best. Trust us, support us, resource us. And this is, this one's an important one for me, because when you don't, that is an example, and we just talked about it from the video to our conversation to this, is when you don't, that's an example of that that brings that white savior complex, and it perpetuates white supremacy. And so it elevates this set of knowledge or way of doing things versus this one. And so when you're coming in and you're telling people how to do something, or the best way to do it, because research has showed, even though for us, like we've been researched, we haven't really done our own research. We're doing that now, which to me, anytime something comes out, it's always positive of how it increased rates. I'm not a big research person, only because of how much harm it's done on my people. However, I appreciate the people that are doing the research, especially the ones that are from the communities doing this research in order to uplift and validate what we already know is the best way for us to learn, to teach, to all of those things. And then I said this already, but do not utilize without permission or lead if you aren't from that community or identify with that specific tribal nation. I am gonna, does anybody have questions on this one? No, I'm not hearing any. And I think because I hate doing this, but because we're short on time, I won't really have us go through this. But I do want to I'm going to read a couple of the questions just because I want you to think about the questions and think about where you're at within your organization and your community. Is who is deciding how policies and practices are being rolled out? Does that impact the community positively or negatively? Does it reach and or connect to the community, or is it for standards or policy? And then just again, I think reinforcing that, acknowledging that the tribal-based practices challenges the Western and colonial ways of thinking and doing, and that is okay. That is the work of decolonizing. So I'm going to stop sharing those so that I can drop the link really quick, because then I can't do it when I'm in presenter mode. So I'm going to go grab that link for you all so that you can have the link. So there's the link. And then let me go back to share. All right. So community engagement. Again, this is a short list just of things that I've done myself that I recommend other people doing, but this isn't the end all be all list. So when you are doing community engagement, relationship building, again, that's just a common theme that's been throughout. But when you're doing that relationship building, thinking about your intention versus your impact. And so like oftentimes, because outside organizations are coming in, a lot of the times they're coming in from receiving funds. And so then you think about the intention is coming in with funds, which you are like, I'm bringing you money. This is great. But the impact is, especially if you know grants, all of that, the impact is I set these goals of which I'm going to work with your community. And this is why I'm starting the relationship, is because I have to get this work done for this money. And so the impact can be harmful because ultimately you're there because you have the grant funding that is requiring you to do the work. So when you're thinking about how you're building relationships with community, with tribal nations, thinking about the intent versus your impact. Are you including tribal representation in your work? When you're doing that engagement, are you going to that community and asking, like, how do you want us to show up? What do you want to see? What kind of programs would engage you? What are barriers? What are challenges? And learning about how people want to be supported and engaged. And if you don't have people that are doing that work from the community, you're also missing an opportunity. Does the tribe already do the work you are presenting and proposing? I've had this happen many, many times where, again, going back to grant funding, is you get a grant for a specific type of work, and let's just say the tribe's already doing that work. And so there could have been some work together to where you could have supported that work even further with what they were doing. And then also they're now leading that work and they're doing the work. You're in a supportive role. And so then it's coming from that tribe or that tribal community. Your practices and policies, are they inclusive and reflective of the community you're serving? Looking at those. Being patient. You know, a lot of the times within tribes, when we are within our roles, we have multiple roles. I know I, wore several hats. And I managed several grants. And so just being patient and not having that urgent expected like response time or decision-making time, and just being patient with who you're working with. Because oftentimes, like in our communities too, because of our cultural values, that can mean that we are out also. So sometimes it's not even about like how busy we are, but about what's happening in our community. And so for me, for example, people have been really frustrated with me over the last 3 weeks because I was sick when I came back from Alaska, and I got sick for a couple weeks. And then we had a couple of losses in our community. One was, it was personal for me, and I attended the funeral, and it was a 3-day engagement that I attended. And then the one prior to that, because I am a longhouse cook, our family got asked to cook for that funeral. And so I was out for those 2.5 days. And so I was, out even more from my work. And so, sometimes it's things like that too. And so just being patient. Collaboration and partnership, I always encourage this. If you can collaborate and partner, please do. Please do. Not only does it just feel good to work with other people and have multiple people coming from different angles and sectors, but also the resource sharing that can happen in partnerships, so that you can do your work longer if you're sharing the resource, if you're both holding the resource part of it that requires, like if you're doing an event together and you take certain aspects of it, then that allows people to work just a little longer sometimes. If it's like, don't have to pay for the food for that event, now you can add another event in another month. So, sometimes there's little things like that. Mutual respect, resourcing the ask, and ask questions and get involved. And one thing that I wanted to bring up, which, let me see if it's in my next one. No, it's not. I'm pretty sure it's in there somewhere, but we're going to go back. Oh, there we go. Okay. I wanted to talk a little bit more about allyship. And I feel like this was in that same conversation as when we're talking about systems and how we have to work within a system. And I feel like right now, especially with where we're at as a country, there's the word allyship often can be multiple things. It can be weaponized by people. It can be self-serving sometimes, depending on how you're using it. It can be sometimes just not true. And it goes back to also that intent versus impact. Like you might have the best intentions of like, I support tribal communities, and you say that, but let's say you serve on a board, and in that board meeting, you ultimately don't stand up for that tribal community? Is that allyship? I don't think it is, because your impact is, you could have made an impact in that moment and you chose not to because you chose silence, which then is harmful to the tribal community. And so really being mindful and careful when we use that word, but also what does that word mean to us? And really thinking about the intent versus impact. And, you know, there's conversations all around the country about it, and it, you know, we can talk about it in, like, if you're in a rally, maybe you're in the front, or if it's be able to call out maybe privilege happening in that moment, you call it out instead of having the woman of color or the person of color have to do that, because that's puts them in a harmful position, especially with the way that this country is currently sitting. And so just thinking about allyship and what that looks like, feels like for you, and really thinking about the intent versus impact. Are you really moving and your actions are showing that you are showing up to support tribal and Native communities, Indigenous communities? Okay. I know our time is limited. Okay, what can this look like? I won't go into a lot of this just because we are short on time. I have examples that will talk about a lot of this. But I think for me, you know, and we kind of already talked about a lot of this, centering Indigenous knowledge and ways of being, and that can be done through a lot of different ways, which in my examples, I am going to talk about it, about how that looks, what that looks like in real time. And so I'm just going to go on to the next slide. So examples. So the picture on your left, the one with all the yarn, so you have 3 women here that are pictured. And this was a part of a pilot project that I was doing in my community around how we can incorporate, it was called Awareness Through Art. And it was about how do we incorporate art, and that includes cultural art, into our justice system. And so it was a pilot diversion program around centering arts, which included cultural arts. And so in this photo, what you have is, this is one of our sessions. It was a 6-month program. And if you were, I had a youth track and an adult track. And if you were on probation, you had the choice to either do this program or their traditional diversion stuff. And that was, I mean, they have a different diversion program. And so we had people choose this program. And so this was the 2nd session that we did, and they're doing basket weaving in this picture. The gal in the blue on the far right, that is the teacher. Her mom is next to her in the pink. And then one of the gals that was helping with the program is next to her. Kiana, her name's Kiana. She is a member of my community. At the time in this photo, she was 12. She absolutely loves to weave. She's been doing it for years. She's now 16. So this was 4 years ago. And she loved weaving, and it was something she still loves it. She still does it today. But we brought her in to teach both the youth track and the adult track. And I will tell you, the adult track, they were like, they thought one of us adults were going to be leading. And then they were like, wait, what? This little girl's going to teach us how to do this? And it was pretty awesome, though. They learned, they respected her. And the reason I share it is 2 things. For one, it's a cultural teaching. Weaving is a cultural teaching. We use baskets to gather our huckleberries, and you can use them for other things too. Our roots as well. And this is another way of incorporating not only people from the community who have those specific skills and abilities, and really uplifting our own people to teach this knowledge, but also that age doesn't matter. And a lot of times in this country, the older you are, the more respect you get and the more opportunities you are given to teach. And so we wanted to disrupt that and say, no, we can learn from our children. We do it every single day. We might not talk about it, but we do it every day. We learn a lot from our children. And so that was the purpose of that. And also she just loves, like, and I know her personally, so that was also a factor, but we really wanted to highlight, not only are we using our own people, but youth can be included in that, and youth can lead. And this led to her actually going to Portland State University and leading a weaving class for them as well. And so she's amazing. She loves weaving, and you know, our both our youth and adult tracks, they connected with her. And even though she was quiet, she taught them and they learned very well from her. So the other example that's on the right side is a current program that we're running with Papalux Misha, which is, I'm the executive director for that organization, and it's called Native American Student Union. And what they do is it's centered around supporting high school students to either go to college or start considering what they want to do after high school. And we support all forms. We don't really say which way is the right way. We just support and we provide resources. And we bring in, they've done a variety of different programs. And so one of them, our high school students learned how to fillet salmon, and then they canned it. And then they got to take that home to their families. They got to go out and pick berries, and then they canned those huckleberries and they got to take those home to their families. And several of them, this is the first time that they actually went out and ever gathered. And so some of it is connecting kids to culture, but also some of it is reconnecting kids to culture and introducing it and teaching them the teachings, because not all of our families have the accessibility or the teachers within their families to be able to learn their history and these teachings. And so this club allows for them to do that. And it's guided by students. So the students wanted to learn how to fillet fish and can it. That was one of their requests. And so we made it happen. We've taken them on college tours. We bring in guest speakers to talk about different topics. We're about to do a FAFSA workshop with our students and our college students. And so we try to weave in as much culture as we can, and then also all the supports and resources that they need. Are there any questions on these two examples? I am not hearing any, so we'll go on to the next one. So these, what I like to always make sure that I'm trying to do the best that I can is making sure that people feel included, that they have ownership, and that there's a collaboration. And so the example on the left with all the sticky notes, that was actually done in Portland with 9 tribes, the 9 tribes of Oregon, plus Nea and Nara. And we were developing a tribal, what was it called? It was our tribal health strategic plan. And so it's basically us developing, it was us developing what the next 10 years would look like in our health departments within our tribes and our Indian Health Services. And so I just put this up here because it's, the way that it was done was we were there for 2 days. The tribes got to send, 5 or 6, some of us had 10 different identified folks that were from different levels of within the tribal organization to contribute to this overall plan for the next 10 years. And so you didn't just have the leaders, you had also people identified from different departments, even student college interns got to go. So it was a mix of a lot of different people from the different tribes and all their different perspectives and what they wanted to bring, their ideas, their solutions, their challenges and barriers with some of the things we were trying to address with this plan. And so it was a really well-rounded plan that we got to put together. And it was a really interesting, first time I've seen all of our tribes come together to do something like this, and it was really awesome. The one on the picture on the right is a part of that Awareness Through Art pilot project I just talked about. And this was the very first session. And what we did with that session was we had, you see, spiritual, social, physical, mental. They're all on those big sticky notes. We had them separated in each corner. And what we asked was, this was the self-care session. It was the very first session that we had with them. And we said, what does self-care look like for you? What are the activities or what are the needs that you would have? What would you want self-care to look like for you, or how do you already do it? And so we explained, you know, in the social, what do you do? In the mental, in the physical, and the spiritual. And so they went around the room and they listed, and this is the adult track. These are the adults that we did with this one. We did both. We did youth and adults, but this is the adult. And so they put all their stuff, and then you'll see check marks, because we said, if you agree with it or you do that same thing, feel free to just check it so you don't have to write it again. And then, so they did that. Then we brought them all together and we put them together like this in a circle. And we talked about how if you are out of alignment in one area, it's going to impact. So for example, if you're out in your social, it's going to impact your mental and your spiritual and probably your physical. If you're out in your physical, it's going to impact your mental and your spiritual and probably your social. And so we just talked about how these different areas of your life in your being impact you in different ways. And so if you're not taking care of your whole self, you're going to be impacted and you're going to be off balance. And then we had them do a self-care plan after that. So they developed a 6-month self-care plan for themselves and just put down, you know, things they were committing to, when they would check in about how they were doing. And then I would check in with them and say, how's your self-care plan doing? Are you doing it? And, you know, and we told them, like, if this includes some of the stuff that you have on your core order, put that in here. Like, some of them were required to do counseling. Some of them were required to do parent classes. And we just said, add it on there, because that is a part of you taking care of yourself, even if the courts are telling you to. And we'll reflect on it. Like, how does going to counseling make you feel? And do you like that counseling, or can we connect you somewhere else? And so we, you know, and this was the first time for a lot of them that actually they started talking about self-care. And some of them had questions when we introduced the concept. They were like, what is self-care? And so we had to explain to them what that was and what that looked like, without creating a box for them, right? Because we don't want to put anybody in a box of like, it looks like a bubble bath with the salts and the candles and the piano music in the background. Like, no, that's not what that can be for someone, a very specific idea of what for them is self-care, but it can be a lot of different things. Self-care can be going to a language class, learning our language. Self-care could be going out with your family and picking huckleberries. Self-care can be going to the river and going swimming. So there's a lot of variations, and so that's another example of the way that we felt like we were able to give them ownership over their self-care and what their care for them looked like. and to also say it's okay to take care of yourself. Because a lot of times in our communities, especially in our tribal communities, I feel like we're often doing everything for everybody else, taking care of so and so, you know, and sometimes we don't take care of ourselves. So we were also wanting to give permission to people to really think about how they need to be taken care of, what that looks like for them. And so they got to be included in the bigger idea of what does self-care look like for this group, but then they also got to take ownership over their own plan. Is there any questions on these ones? All right, well, would you look at that? I'm really surprised. We have 12 minutes to spare, if I'm reading my clock right. Yes. And so these are, as usual, I like to leave questions to consider. And I always word it that way because I never know if we're going to get to Q&A. And I always want people to walk away with something to think about when they're walking away. So some things to consider. How are you currently engaging community? What does that look like? What does that look like for you? How did the pandemic highlight some of the things you thought you couldn't or wouldn't offer? You know, a lot of times people would say, I mean, it's just like the working from home, right? Before the pandemic, it was like, nope, you can't work from home. You ain't gonna do it. We can't do that. And then the pandemic happened. And then they were like, oh, it's okay. We'll get you a laptop. We'll get you the stuff you need so that you can work from home because we need you to work. And then all those different policies and things were out the window because they still needed you to work. And so when you think about the things that you say that you can't, you or your organization says that let's see. Sorry, I'm reading the comments in the chat. There's a link that I put in there, and then I can go check before we jump off of what the name is of the video. So there's a lot of things that like we said we couldn't do, right? So we, you know, like sometimes you say you can't, like in my community, for example, that was definitely something they were like, you're not going to work from home. And then the pandemic happened, and then our entire tribe was working from home. But there's things that we've done with engagement where we've like, oh, we can't do that. But then when push comes to shove and you have no other options, you get creative and you're like, oh yeah, we can do that. So thinking about the things that you said you couldn't do, your organization says they can't do, are those limitations or reasons of why you can't do it? What are those, and are those realistic, or is it because you just don't want to? What does your brainstorming, planning, and implementing practices look like? Who is at that table? Who is missing? Is your work, decisions and policies driven by community? Is it reflective of community? If it's not, how can you bring that perspective to the table in order to make a more well-rounded decision that is better for the community or the people you're serving? So is there anybody that wants to share, have questions, comments? I'm going to leave space here. I'm also going to go and grab the name of the video. So please feel free to come off mute or drop it in the chat. Okay, so the name of it with the link was Indigenous Knowledge to Close Gaps in Indigenous Health by Marcia Anderson Decode 2. Not sure how to, probably not saying that right. Well, if there's no questions, I will, oh, yes, I will drop my email in the chat. Usually I have that on the last slide, but for some reason I don't have that on this one. Let me put my email in the chat. And when you email me, I would just ask you to reference this training, just so I know, have a context of where you're coming from. And then I know that there's been people that have reached out to OHEI for some further work. I will follow up and connect with those that are requesting more work. I am open to more engagements. Just have to have a conversation and see what that's like. Yeah, thank you all. And I will give you 6 minutes of your life back. That might give you, you can go outside and take a breath and get some air in. And please fill out the feedback form. I'm always looking for ways to improve. And I thank you all for coming to the 3 sessions, listening and joining us. Thank you so much. And I'll hand it back over to Daisy.
Thank you, Jalen, so much. Yeah, thank you all for joining us. And I also want to say thank you to our interpreters today, our captioner as well, and everybody who was helping with our technology. So we really appreciate you. And like Jalen said, if you have a minute, please fill out the feedback form. It is in the chat, and we look forward to hosting you all in the future. Thank you so much, Aileen, and everybody. Take care.